What is up guys, and welcome back to the channel. This is Dr. Hammerstang, and today we'll be doing a comparison video over here between two very interesting phones. In the first corner over here we have the Galaxy A52s 5G, and this is the third lineup of the A52 series. And over here we do have the Poco F3, one of my favorite phones here in 2021. And today what we're going to do, of course, is go through the key specs and features of both of these two phones, and of course help you to decide which phone to get by the end of this video. So yes, without further ado, let's just get right into it. Alright, so first things first, let's start off with the prices on both of these two phones, and I will also be including the USD prices as well. So first here we have the Poco F3, and this one does come in two variants. If you want to get the lower spec model, you can get it for about 13.99 ringgit Malaysia, and if you want the higher spec model, it sells for about 16.99 ringgit Malaysia. Next up we have the A52s 5G, and here in Malaysia there's only one variant over here which sells for about 18.99 ringgit Malaysia. Next up here, let's talk about the build and design on both of these two phones. So starting here with the A52s 5G, it does use a plastic on the back over here, whereas on the front it does use a Gorilla Glass 5. Going on to the Poco F3 over here, it also uses a Gorilla Glass 5, but you can find it on the back over here and also on the front. So in terms of your scratch resistance and drop resistance, I think also over here with the F3 it definitely does it better. Of course, if you talk about the premium feel to it, definitely this one here, the F3 does take the cake. It is a little bit heavier compared to the A52s 5G, and it's a little bit more to hold compared to this phone over here. Other than that, in terms of the design of both these two phones, as we can see, they do have their white color variants. Over here, Awesome White. Over here is the Pearl White edition. And to be honest, in terms of the design, both of them do a really good job. You're not going to get a lot of fingerprints on the back over here, so you do not need to worry if you do not have a case on it. And yes, overall in terms of build design on both these two phones, they really do a good job. Next up here, let's talk about the displays on both of these two phones. Here with the Poco F3, it does have a bigger display, 6.67 inches compared to the 6.5 inch you can find on the A52s 5G. Both of these two phones do have an AMOLED panel. Here uses an E4 AMOLED panel, over here a Super AMOLED panel, and both of them can reach a maximum of 120 Hz of refresh rate. In terms of the color, in terms of the deep blacks and all, they're contrasty. I think both of them do a really good job, but I do feel that with the Samsung device, it does have the better display, slightly better display compared to the Poco F3. And of course, if you talk about the peak brightness over here, I think both of them are pretty much equal. But again, in terms of just the overall color and everything else, I do prefer it here on the Samsung device. Alright, so next up here, let's talk about the stereo speakers on both these two phones. With the F3, it's placed on the sides over here, whereas over here on A52s 5G, one's on the side, one's at the earpiece over here. So starting with the F3. Alright, so in terms of the speakers here, both of them do sound pretty similar in terms of bass, in terms of the clarity, in terms of volume, both of them are pretty much equal, but I do prefer it on the Samsung device again because it does have a little bit more bass compared to the F3. Alright, so next up here, let's talk about the battery and charging on both of these two phones. So starting with the sizes over here, with the F3, it does have a slightly bigger battery size over here, 4520, compared to the 4500 mAh of battery you can find on the A52s 5G. That's not the only difference, and now let's talk about that charging. Here with the Poco F3, it does come with a 33 watt brake charger, so it's able to charge up from 0 all the way to 100% in 52 minutes. Next up here, we have the A52s 5G, and this is bundled with a 25 watt brake charger, so it's able to charge up from 0 all the way to 100% in just over an hour. But if we want to talk about the battery performance on both of these two phones, I have to give it here to the Poco F3. It definitely does tend to last longer compared to the A52s 5G. One thing to keep in mind is that both of these two phones do have an IP rating. Here with the Poco F3, it does have an IP53 rating, which means it's dust and splash protected. Whereas over here with the A52s 5G, it is IP67 rated, so it's dust and water resistant up to 1 meter for 30 minutes. One more thing I want to talk about here is the fingerprint unlock on both of these two phones. So with the Poco F3, it actually does work faster because it does have a dedicated fingerprint scanner over here, which works very flawlessly. Even at night, you don't have to worry about it because it just works so well over here. Just gonna click on it on the side and it gets the job done. Even with face unlock, as we can see from here, it works really fast. Over here with the A52s 5G, it does have an under display fingerprint scanner, and sometimes you have to hit the right spot over here. That's what she said. And when it comes to the face unlock as well, it definitely does take some time compared to the Poco F3 over here. Next up here, let's talk about the internal specs on both of these two phones. So starting here with the Poco F3, it does come with the Snapdragon 870, and you can actually get the 6 or 8 gigs RAM variant, which does come with 128 gigs of storage or 256 gigs of storage. There is no micro SD expansion with this, but there is 5G support. Going on to the A52s 5G over here, this one here does come with the Snapdragon 778. Yes, it is one of the highest end kind of mid-range chipset, and of course inside here it does come with 8 gigs RAM. In other countries they do have the 6 gigs RAM variant, so yes, do check out with your local carrier. And over here you do have 256 gigs of storage. Over here you do have a micro SD expansion, which of course is something really good in this type of price range. To be honest, in terms of just normal daily performance, you're not going to notice much of a difference over here. In terms of just hardcore gaming, definitely over here with the Poco F3, it definitely tends to work better compared to this one over here. But in just day-to-day usage, like I said, social media and going through your social feed, your YouTube, Netflix and all this other stuff, you're not going to notice much of a difference. Yes, I've actually done a full comparison video test between both of these two phones, so I'll leave a link up above and also down below for you guys to check that one out. Next up here, let's talk about the software side of things over here. So with the Poco F3, it does come with your MIUI 12.5, whereas over here it does come with the ONEUI 3.1. Both of these two phones do give you a ton loads of customization and personalization, so you're not going to get bored with using both of these two phones. Definitely over here with the ONEUI 3.1, it's a little bit more polished compared to the MIUI 12.5, but overall in terms of just the usability, I think both of them have been doing really good for me. Over here with the Samsung device, you don't have your Samsung Pay, you don't have your text mode, so overall in terms of just the overall features, I think both of them are pretty much equal. Alright, so last thing over here, let's talk about those cameras. So here with the Poco F3, it does come with a 20 megapixel f2.5 sensor and can record up to 1080p at 30 fps. Over here on the A52s 5G, it does have a 32 megapixel f2.2 sensor and it can record up to 4K at 30 fps. Going on to the rear cameras over here, the Poco F3 does have a triple camera setup, starting with a 48 megapixel f1.8 dual autofocus main lens, an 8 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide, and a 5 megapixel f2.4 macro shooter. And now on to the A52s 5G. This one does come with a quad camera setup, starting with a 64 megapixel f1.8 dual autofocus with OIS sensor, a 12 megapixel f2.2 ultra wide, a 5 megapixel f2.4 macro shooter, and a 5 megapixel 2.4 depth camera. Now let's check out some photos from both of these two phones and see which one does look better. Alright, so let's check out some shots with the main lens, and to be honest, both of them do a very good job under good lighting conditions, but I do feel that with the A52s, it does have a better dynamic range compared to the Poco F3. In terms of details and color, I gotta say that the F3 does look a bit more dull, making it look a little bit more natural compared to the more contrasty and more punchy colors on the A52s. Going on to some ultra wide shots over here, the A52s does have a wider field of view, and in terms of the color, it does have that colder tone compared to the Poco F3 again as well. In terms of color and details, I do prefer it on the A52s. It does look a bit more presentable compared to the Poco F3. In terms of the dynamic range again, I do prefer it on the A52s. It's better control compared to the Poco F3. Going on to some portrait shots, I do feel that both phones do a fairly decent job when it comes to subject separation and details, but I do find that the dynamic range is actually nicer on the A52s compared to the Poco F3, which does struggle with their skin tones. One thing to note is that on both of these two phones, you can actually change the intensity of the background blur after you have taken the photos. Going on to some selfie shots, I gotta say that the A52s is the clear winner among the two. It does give you a very good amount of details and subject separation, and when it comes to the skin color over here, I do prefer it on the A52s. One more thing to note is that the A52s does give you two types of field of view, so you can actually change it from a selfie to a wavy. Going on to some night mode shots over here, this is with the night mode off, and when we turn the magic on over here, you can notice a vast difference between both of these two phones. The Poco F3 does lose a lot more details and does look a bit more washed out compared to the A52s, and this is where I think Samsung has done really well with their software, giving you a very crispy and very detailed shots regardless of the brightness on the back. Overall, in terms of the grains over here and in terms of the noisiness, I do feel that you're going to find it more with the Poco F3. Overall, in terms of night mode, I really like the A52s. Even if you do switch it on to the ultra wide shots over here as well, it's very consistent with the A52s compared to the Poco F3. So going on to the rear cameras over here, both of them can record up to 1080p at 30 fps, and in terms of dynamic range and color, both of them are pretty similar, I would say, and of course in terms of stabilization, both of them are doing a good job. Going on to 1080p at 60 fps, both of them are pretty shaky over here, but I think that the A52s just does a slightly better job compared to the Poco F3 in terms of color and dynamic range. Both of them are pretty similar. At 4K at 30 fps over here, this is pretty disappointing from the A52s, seeing that they do have OIS, but it's not really working here. As you can see on the F3, it does a much better job. Switching on to some selfie video over here at 1080p at 30 fps, both of them do a decent job, but I gotta say that the dynamic range is actually handled better by the Poco F3, but when it comes to the skin tones and details on the face, I do prefer it on the A52s. Going on to 1080p at 60 fps, again it's a very similar pattern. The dynamic range goes to the F3, whereas on the details and face it does go to the A52s. Lastly, over here we have it at 4K at 30 fps on the A52s, which does give you a little bit more details, but as we can see here again, the dynamic range is a little bit more blown out compared to the Poco F3, which I can only max out at 1080p at 30 fps. So that is it between the Poco F3 and the A52s 5G, and of course the ultimate question is which one to get. And yes, definitely over here with the Poco F3, it is cheaper, it does give you everything you want in the phone, your stereo speaker setup, a nice display, a good camera setup, and overall just a complete phone over here. But definitely here with the A52s 5G, I do feel as well it does make a case over here. It definitely does give you a better camera setup over here, it does give you a headphone jack, it does give you a micro SD expansion, but it is a little bit more pricey compared to the Poco F3. But overall, I think both of these two phones are really good in its own right. Of course, these are just my thoughts and my opinion. Do leave yours in the comment section down below. If you guys did enjoy this and also want to see more of this type of videos, do click the like and smash that subscribe button down below for more videos like this in the future. Do also follow me on my social as well on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and also here on YouTube at Dr. Hammerstack. So that is it. This is Dr. Hammerstack. Stay safe, take care, and wash those hands.